Wow, how do you live up to an introduction like that? You know, it reminds me of an event I attended in New York a few years ago where Henry Kissinger was introduced, and the person who introduced him said, "Dr. Kissinger does not need an introduction." Whereupon Henry walked up to the stage and said, "It may be true I do not need an introduction, but I like a nice introduction." So thank you, Leora, for this amazing introduction. As I always say, if my parents were here, my father would be very proud, and my mother would actually believe every word. But thank you, and thank you for all you do and for co-chairing this evening, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Avi, and everybody here. You know, it's amazing. When I stand here tonight, I really pity you for one reason, that you cannot be with me at the podium and watch out this amazing crowd. I mean, there is so much love for Israel, so much commitment to Israel, so much care about this amazing institution of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, that it really warms my heart. I mean, I can really feel the warmth and the electricity and the commitment, and I really thank you for that, really very, very much. And also thank you for giving me another opportunity to come to Canada. It's always like coming home. It really is. I'm not saying this because I'm in Toronto. I speak all over the world, and I never say that anywhere but in Canada. Canada, when I come to Canada, I feel at home. I feel the love for Israel, and Canada is truly the best friend Israel has in the world. It's truly amazing. It was Israel's best friend when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. It is Israel's best friend when Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister. And it was Israel's best friend for the 6 years when I was at the UN. I believe the Canadian ambassador then was John McNee, and he and his wife Sue were great personal friends, but also someone I could always count on. And their friendship and Canada's friendship is not something we take for granted in these very, very difficult years. Talking of difficulties, I do have a very difficult task, because speaking after Rabbi Heyer, thank you for that incredible list of miracles. You know, it was Chaim Weizmann who actually said that in Israel, the impossible we do at once. Miracles take a little bit longer. But your stories were great. And speaking after you reminds me of that story of the 8-year-old boy who was the sole survivor of the terrible flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania in 1887. He was 8 years old, everybody else had perished, and from that day on, all he did was go from village to village and tell people how he survived the flood. And at the ripe old age, he reached heaven, and the angel in charge of activities in heaven said to him, "Look, I mean, even here, there are no free lunches. You'll have to work." And what can you do? And he said, "Well, the only thing I can do is tell people how I survived the flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania in 1887. And the angel said, "Well, you know, I don't think that's going to be so interesting, because we have people here who survived Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is no big deal." He said, "Look, this happened when I was 8 years old. From that day, that's all I ever did. That's all I know how to do." So the angel said, "Let me consult with my superior." And he went up and came back a few minutes later, and he said, "You know, I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is you can tell people how he survived the flood. The bad news is Noah is going to be in the audience." So Noah is in the audience, Rabbi Heyer. You're Noah to me, and I'll try and do my best to share some thoughts with you and some feelings about the country I love very much and I'm very proud of, and that I know you love very much and are very proud of. And I'll try not to keep you too long, but for one very special reason. First of all, as you may hear, I'm a bit hoarse, and I apologize for my hoarseness. I hope you can hear me. But it's not the first time that I find myself in the awkward position of apologizing for some impediment while at the podium. It was some time ago that I was shaving in the morning and thinking about a very, very big speech I was going to deliver to a huge audience. And while I was shaving, I was thinking about my speech, and I cut my face very badly. And in the evening, that cut was still very prominent. I felt the need to explain it to the audience. And I told them, I'm really sorry about this. I couldn't hide it. But this morning, while I was thinking about my speech, I cut my face. At the end of my speech, a very nice gentleman came up to me and said, Ambassador, I have some advice for you. Next time you shave, think about your face and cut your speech. So remembering this very wise advice, I still do want to share with you some thoughts about Israel and Israel and the world in this very, very challenging time. And I want to first thank you. Beyond the thanks I've already thanked you, I want to thank you for something which you may not even be aware of. You know, when I was appointed ambassador to the UN, and as Leora said, I had no diplomatic experience whatsoever. I was a business person, and for some reason, Shimon Peres, who was then foreign minister, and Arik Sharon, who was prime minister, that incredible couple of Israeli politics who we miss so sorely today, came to me. And, you know, I was head of the Israeli Chamber of Commerce, and I led many economic delegations and accompanied state leaders or Israeli leaders on state visits. And I kept saying that Israeli business people, especially business leaders, should do more for the country than just make money. And one day, Shimon and Arik came to me and said, Danny, you've been saying it for years. Now we want you to go and do it. I said, do what? And they said, we want you to be an ambassador. So I immediately pictured myself on the beaches of the Bahamas somewhere. And I said, where? And they said, the UN. And I asked for 24 hours to think about it. And 24 seconds later, I said, yes. And my last meeting before leaving for the UN was with Arik Sharon, who I admired and have had, you know, missed very much even today. I spent 3.5 hours with Arik. And before I left, he said, Danny, before you leave, I congratulate you, I wish you well, but I also apologize. And I said, why? He said, because I'm sending you to a horrible place. And you're going to be lonely, you're going to be persecuted, you're going to be isolated, people are going to hate you. This is not a fun job. A few weeks later, I'll tell you something I shouldn't say, but every Saturday I spoke to Arik Sharon on the phone. It was 11 a.m. in New York, 6 o'clock in the farm where Arik lived. And whether I had something important to report or not, it was sort of our weekly talk. And after a few weeks, I said to him, I said, Arik, you remember you told me that I'm going to be lonely and persecuted and feel terrible? He said, yes. I said, well, I have two things to tell you. But the first one, don't share with your colleagues tomorrow morning at the cabinet meeting. And that is that I'm enjoying every minute of it. I don't know if you know, but when you work for the government, you're not supposed to enjoy yourself. So the second thing, though, I told him, is I want you to know that each and every day, when I walk the halls of the United Nations, I walk with my head held up high, because I know I represent a country that is far better than most other members of the United Nations. And feeling that feeling, I also felt that I wanted to really accomplish the dream and the words of the great founder of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Simon Wiesenthal himself, who said that freedom is not a gift from heaven. It is something you have to fight for every day. And I want you to know that each and every day, when I walked to that glass building on First Avenue, to that citadel of hypocrisy and triple standards, because the UN doesn't have double standards. It has triple standards. It has a standards for democracies, it has a standards for totalitarian states, and it has a standard for Israel. But each and every day, when I put on my helmet and flak jacket and went to that building, you were there with me. Truly, it is the support and the partnership and the friendship and the commitment of people like you, of friends like you, who made me able to fight that fight for freedom and for the dignity of Israel each and every day. And you were literally with me when in 2005, I and the great team I had, I have to say we and not I, we were 5 altogether. That's the size of was the size of the Israeli delegation to the UN. When we passed the first ever Israeli-sponsored resolution marking January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That was probably my greatest achievement and certainly my greatest moment at the UN. But I got the courage and the inspiration to do that from the work of this incredible institution, which is the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And when we saw that film, we heard Ben-Gurion say one sentence after Israel was, or the partition plan was approved. It was the same sentence and the only sentence I said at the UN General Assembly when I went up to the podium after that resolution passed unanimously, including Arab countries and Iran, who walked out but did not vote against it. And I went up to the podium and I said, Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higianu lezman hazeh. And that was to a great part thanks to friends like you. I also felt that I represented an amazing country. And I felt we were better than most other members of the United Nations because Israel truly is a unique country. It is a country that makes deserts bloom with its agriculture, that makes diseases disappear with its medicine, that makes the world a better place with its research and technology and innovation. And it is indeed even a country that makes the world a richer place with its art and with its culture. I can tell you that one of my greatest sources of pride in New York was the quantity and quality of art and culture that this tiny little country brings to this cultural capital of the world. A day doesn't go by where there isn't an Israeli conductor or an Israeli soloist or an Israeli painter opening a gallery or an Israeli dance group at the Joyce. It's just unbelievable. That is the country that Israel is. And one of the things I tried to do at the UN was to bring home to my colleagues and to the world the true Israel, the real face of Israel, not that country that is perceived as a place of bloodshed and horror and terror, but a country of beauty and excellence and creativity, a country that is compassionate, is the first one to go and rescue people trapped after a disaster or an earthquake, even in countries that we have no relations with or even perceived as hostile to us. That is the true face of Israel, which I try to portray. Now that country, Israel, who you love so much, is today facing some of its most dangerous and most extreme challenges. It is facing even and I say this practically for the first time, existential threats. Because when you look at Israel today, and you see Hezbollah with thousands of rockets pointed at every inch of Israel, and very accurate and powerful ones. You see Hamas in the south having practically the same capability. And you see Iran spreading its bloody tentacles and exporting its Shia extremism all over the Middle East, practically together with Russia taking over Syria, totally disorienting and destroying Yemen, threatening all the Sunni regimes in the region, and actually on its way to becoming a nuclear power. And it will become a nuclear power in spite of the terrible agreement which was signed between the United States and the P5. You know, one of the things, and I know I'm saying things which may sound a bit simplistic, but one of the things that disturbed me so much about the signing of that agreement with Iran was not just the fact that it was a bad agreement, not just the fact that it allowed Iran eventually to become a nuclear power. The thing that disturbed me most was witnessing at 3 o'clock in the morning after the signing in Geneva, the secretaries of state and the foreign ministers of all 6 countries, including John Kerry and including the British and the French and the others, embracing Mohammad Jawad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, who, by the way, served with me for 4 years as Iran's ambassador to the UN. And I knew the minute he was appointed foreign minister and chief negotiator, we were in deep trouble, because the guy is a master negotiator and a charmer, and he saw in front of him an America that was weak and desperate for a deal, and a Europe that was desperate and hungry for deals with Iran, and he made the most of it. But what really disturbed me was the laughter and the smiles and the hugs, as if a baby was just born, whereas what was really born was a monster. And these were hugs between the leaders of free democracies and the world's most dangerous perpetrator of terrorism, exporter of death, bloody fingers and tentacles and a twisted brain, which has killed hundreds and thousands of people, including Americans and others all over the world. And there are these people who negotiated this terrible deal. Okay, you negotiated a terrible deal. You want to shake his hand, but there was an atmosphere of celebration which worried me very, very much. And today, each and every day, we see the result of that. Iran is stronger. It has hundreds of billions of dollars of a surplus. French companies are competing. Who will invest more hundreds of billions of dollars in that country? And at the same time, they continue to totally destabilize our region and terrorize our region and threaten the small Satan, which they call Israel, and the big Satan, which they call the United States, and actually the whole of the free world. So that is the reality we're facing. And in spite of that reality, and maybe because of that reality, I'm actually optimistic about Israel. And not just because, as Leora said, I'm an incurable optimist and a romantic. I'm also a realist. I think that it is precisely because of these dark clouds and ominous threats which Israel is facing that we can see a ray of hope in all that darkness. Because the fear of Iran, the fear of Shia extremism, is shared not just by us. We're not really afraid. We can deal with it. Let me tell you and promise you, Israel can deal with Iran. And if the time comes and we have to do very unusual steps, and maybe even dangerous ones, to secure our freedom and democracy, we will do it. But the rest of the Arab world is scared to death. The moderate Arab and Muslim states, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, or the Gulfies as they call them, Egypt, Jordan, which is tottering, all those countries are scared to death. Because really what we're witnessing today is a fight between moderates and extremists. Extremists who are threatening civilization as we know it and our way of life, and threatening the so-called moderate Arab and Muslim regimes. When you think about it, we see a very interesting phenomena where actually the fight for supremacy and hegemony in our region is actually between two countries who are not even Arab. It's between Turkey and Iran. But something there is changing as well. You know, we are celebrating or marking these weeks several anniversaries. As Rabbi Haya pointed out, the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel, the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War, but also just last week, the 40th anniversary of the visit of Anwar Sadat, President of Egypt, to Israel. And when Anwar Sadat came off the plane, he said a few things, but one thing which really stuck with me was, he said, Egypt is the mother of the Arab world. All the rest are tribes with flags. It was very true then. Eventually, Egypt became a tribe with a flag. But now Egypt has a leader who thinks himself as the new Nasser, who wants to restore pride and leadership of the Arab world to Egypt, and can bring into the tent all those other countries, including the Saudis, who, by the way, have a very, very close cooperation with Israel. I meet with Saudi leaders regularly, at least 2 or 3 times a month. I know the new prince who has now taken those extraordinary steps and, you know, put scores of his cousins and nephews and uncles in prison. Admittedly, the prison is called the Ritz-Carlton. He's also confiscated their belonging or their fortunes. And by the way, if you noticed, when he did this, Saudi Arabia closed the private airport in Riyadh. Those princes wouldn't know their way to the commercial airport. So he did this, and this is no fluke and no coincidence. This is part of a pattern, part of a new puzzle, part of a new reality in the region where younger leaders and moderate Arab and Muslim leaders are trying to change the structure and the culture of their countries, but also realizing one very important thing. They realize at long last that Israel is not their enemy, that the threat to them does not emanate from Jerusalem, but rather from Tehran. They not only realize that Israel is not their enemy, they realize that Israel is their ally, and that they can, by joining forces with Israel, become allies, not just by gaining from our technology and creativity, and by us joining forces economically to make the Middle East maybe the next world's emerging growth market, but mainly to stand against the Iranian threat. And that is why I believe that we have a very real chance today for a new, bold, regional initiative where Israel, together with the moderate Arab and Muslim states, can join forces, form a coalition of the willing and a coalition of the moderates, and actually create a new reality in the region. Now, I used to be a great believer in peace and in becoming friends forever, the day after. I realized in recent months and in recent years actually that what we're talking about with the Palestinians is not about marriage, it's about divorce. People make the mistake of thinking that when there is peace, we're going to be married to the Palestinians and live happily ever after. That's not going to happen. What we're actually talking about is a divorce settlement where each one lives their own lives, but peacefully next to each other. And I'm not sure that even with the declared or rumored initiative planned by President Trump in the United States, which to me is, like the president itself, predictably unpredictable. I'm not sure that will actually be the real solution. I don't think we're in for a comprehensive peace between us and the Palestinians. But what we can achieve, and I believe have the real possibility of achieving, is a regional agreement with the Arab and Muslim states, led by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Gulf states, and hopefully with the support of the international community, which will also address, because there's no other way of doing it, the Palestinian issue and create a gradual process which will eventually also solve the Palestinian issue. Because I want to be very frank with you. At the end of the day, the agreement with the Palestinians, call it peace, call it gradual, call it step by step, call it separation, will be very similar to the Clinton initiative in 2000. That's the real tragedy. Because at the end, everybody knows what the end game is going to be. The Palestinians themselves realize that the 1967 borders are not an option. Because, not even for them, because in 67 there was no contiguity between Gaza and the West Bank. They realized that the right of return is a non-starter. The only real sticking point is Jerusalem. And I believe that somehow, with some goodwill and maybe universal sovereignty and divinity or whatever, even Jerusalem, without in any way ever giving up Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, that too can be solved. So at the end of the day, the parameters are there. We know that they're going to be. The name of the game at the end of the day is leadership. We need bold leadership, both in Israel and among the Palestinians and in the Arab world, because there's no way the Palestinians will do it unless they get the stamp of approval, the kosher certificate, if you want, of the Arab world, that they should go ahead and do it. And I believe that, unfortunately, today we live in a world with very little leadership. We don't see great leadership around the world, except in this country. I think you do have great leadership, but there are very few countries like that. You see even, you see what happened in Germany. I mean, even Angela Merkel, who was considered the anchor of European leadership, is tottering. Theresa May doesn't look too well lately. Emmanuel Macron still has to prove himself. I don't want on Thanksgiving to give any marks to the present administration in the United States. They've just pardoned the Turkey. I think that's probably one of the greatest achievements. And I do believe that we need that kind of leadership. But I believe, as Rabbi Heyer has told us tonight, leadership emerges at the strangest of times when you least expect it. Nobody expected Harry Truman, the owner of a haberdashery in Independence, Missouri, to be one of the greatest American presidents ever. And we had similar examples in Israel. Nobody expected Arik Sharon to be such a great prime minister. And with all the faults and mistakes he made Nobody expected Ehud Olmert to be such a great prime minister after Arik Sharon. And he did take some of the most courageous decisions in Israeli history. So we have to be hopeful. We have to believe that that leadership will emerge. And with the present reality in our burning, volatile, crazy region of the Middle East, I believe that the opportunity is there. We have a unique, unprecedented, historic opportunity to totally change the reality of our region and reach an agreement for all the reasons I've outlined with the moderate Arab and Muslim states, which will, at the end of the day, make Israel more secure, more peaceful. And I can promise you one thing. Whatever happens, Israel will prevail. It will prevail not only because of its excellence, not only because of its creativity, not only because it is strong. It will prevail because history has proved time and time again that when the odds are against us, we do prevail. And it will prevail because truly, with friends like you and with friends like the Simon Wiesenthal Center, it can do no less. So when you think about Israel and when you think about the Simon Wiesenthal Center, I ask you to remember one thing, and that is that yesterday is history, tomorrow is mystery, today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. Thank you very much.